Long ago, before the tarred roads cut through the red earth and before radios carried voices from distant lands, there lay a village called Asafo-Kɔkɔɔ, resting quietly between a forest thick with spirits and a river that never forgot a name. The people of Asafo-Kɔkɔɔ lived as their fathers have lived and their fathers before them, farming the land, honoring the ancestors, and believing that everything worth having came at the right time. Everything, that is, except for Kwaku Mensah. Kwaku Mensah was not born poor, neither was he born rich. He was born into the most dangerous place of all, the middle, where hunger was known, but comfort was possible. His father had owned 3 cocoa farms in a modest house with a tin roof that sang when rain fell. When Kwaku inherited the land, he inherited enough to live well, but not enough to feel important. And importance was what Kwaku desired most. Each morning as the rooster announced the sun, Kwaku walked his farms counting what he had instead of thanking the earth for what it gave. Where others saw healthy pods, he saw space for more. Where others felt satisfaction, he felt insult. "Why should Kojo own 5 farms while I have only 3?" he would mutter. "Why should the chief greet others before me?" His wife, amaka, was a patient woman with eyes that saw far. She noticed how Kwaku's smile had become thin and how his laughter no longer reached his chest. "Kwaku," she said one evening as they ate fufu by the fire, "the ancestors bless those who know when enough is enough." Kwaku scoffed. "Enough is a word for lazy men. The world respects those who take." Amma said no more, for she knew that greed does not listen, it only hungers. In Asafo-Kɔkɔɔ, it was said that the forest beyond the river held more than trees. Spirits lived there, some generous, some cruel, all unforgiving to fools. Children were warned never to enter without reason. Hunters poured libation before stepping under its canopy. But Kwaku was not afraid of warnings. One Harmattan evening, when the wind carried dust and secrets alike, Kwaku sat alone counting cowries he had borrowed from neighbors under false promises. His debts were growing, yet his desire grew faster. "I need something more," he whispered to himself, "something that never finishes." That night, Kwaku dreamed. He stood at the edge of the forest where an old woman waited, bent like a question mark, holding a blackened calabash sealed with red cloth. Her eyes glowed like embers buried in ash. "This calabash," she said, "will give you whatever you desire, but it eats what feeds it." Kwaku reached for it without hesitation. When he woke, sweat soaked his mat, yet the dream did not fade. It clung to him like smoke in cloth. 3 days later, ignoring the elders' warnings, Kwaku crossed the river and entered the forbidden forest. The trees grew thick and tall, blocking the sun. Drums beat softly, though no drummer could be seen. Kwaku walked until his legs ached and his fear grew teeth. Then he saw her. The old woman from his dream sat beneath a silk cotton tree, the calabash beside her. "You came," she said. "I want wealth more than any man in Asafo-Kɔkɔɔ." The woman smiled, a slow, knowing smile. "Greed is a bowl without a bottom, but since you insist, take it." She handed him the calabash. "The calabash will fill with whatever you ask, but each gift demands payment." "What payment?" Kwaku asked. The woman laughed, and the forest echoed with it. "You will find out." When Kwaku returned home, the calabash was light as air. He placed it in his room and whispered, "Gold." By morning, it overflowed. Kwaku sold the gold, bought land, bought respect, bought silence. But the calabash was not finished, and neither was his hunger. That night, as Amma slept, the calabash trembled softly, like a thing waking up. When Kwaku Mensah awoke the morning after the calabash first filled with gold, he felt lighter than he had in years. Not lighter in body, but in spirit, like a man who had finally discovered the shortcut others were too foolish to see. Sunlight crept through the narrow window of his room, catching the edges of the calabash and making its dark surface gleam as if it were smiling. He reached for it at once. "Gold," he whispered again, testing whether the night before had been a dream. The calabash shuddered softly, like a creature clearing its throat. When Kwaku lifted the lid, his breath caught. Inside lay not just gold dust this time, but heavy nuggets, warm to the touch, their surfaces glowing with a richness he had only seen in the hands of traders from the coast. Kwaku laughed aloud, a deep, full laugh that startled the birds outside. "It works," he said. "It truly works." He did not notice that as he laughed, the room seemed to grow colder, or that the calabash, once full, now felt heavier than before. That morning, Kwaku did not go to his farms. Instead, he dressed in his finest cloth and walked to the neighboring villages. He paid off his debts in full, adding extra cowries. "For your patience," he said, with a generous smile. People stared in disbelief. Whispers followed him like shadows. Where did he get such wealth? Perhaps his farms finally bore fruit. "No," another murmured, "this kind of fortune does not grow from soil alone." By midday, Kwaku had purchased 2 additional cocoa farms, land others had labored on for generations. He did not ask whether the sellers would survive without them. He did not ask how many children depended on those fields. He only smiled and counted. Greed, after all, is deaf to questions. When he returned home, Ama Serwa stood waiting in the courtyard. She had heard the rumors. In a village, news moves faster than fire and dry grass. "Kwaku," she said quietly, "what path are you walking?" Kwaku waved his hand dismissively. "A path of success, one you should be proud of." Ama's eyes fell on the calabash, now resting openly beside his mat. She felt a chill creep along her arms. "That thing," she said slowly, "does not belong to us." Kwaku frowned. "It belongs to me." Ama stepped closer. "Nothing powerful comes without cost. Even the ancestors demand sacrifice." Kwaku's face hardened. "You worry too much. Look around you. Have I not provided more in 1 day than in 10 years? Ama fell silent. She knew that when greed finds a voice, wisdom is pushed aside. That night, as the village slept, the calabash stirred again. Kwaku awoke to a low humming sound, like distant drums beating under the earth. He sat up, heart pounding. "What do you want now?" he whispered. The humming stopped. Kwaku hesitated, then spoke again, emboldened by his success. "More land." By morning, messengers arrived with news that distant relatives had mysteriously died without heirs. Their lands, by customary law, passed to Kwaku. The chief himself came to greet him, offering palm wine and praise. Kwaku basked in the attention. He did not notice that his youngest cocoa trees had begun to yellow, or that birds no longer sang near his farms. The payment had begun, but quietly. Days turned into weeks. Each desire Kwaku whispered into the calabash was granted. Livestock multiplied, traders sought his favor, his name was spoken with respect and envy alike. Yet with every gift, something else slipped away. Ama's laughter faded. The house grew tense. The air night felt heavy, as though unseen eyes watched. One afternoon, Kwaku returned from the market to find Ama sitting alone, her eyes red. "Our son, Kojo," she said, her voice trembling. "He collapsed in the field. The healer says his strength has been drained." Kwaku froze. "He was healthy yesterday." Ama looked at the calabash. Kwaku followed her gaze, anger rising like bile. "Do not blame my success for a child's sickness." But that night, as Kojo lay sweating on his mat, Kwaku heard the calabash whisper, not in words, but in feeling, a hunger, a pulling. For the first time since entering the forest, fear brushed against Kwaku's heart. The next morning, desperate, he carried the calabash outside and spoke sharply. "What have you taken from me?" The calabash did not answer. Instead, it grew heavier in his hands, so heavy he dropped it. The ground cracked slightly beneath it. Kwaku stumbled back, breathing hard. Still, when the healer demanded payment to treat Kojo, Kwaku returned to the calabash. "Cowries," he whispered. They came. Kojo recovered within days. Relief flooded the household, but it did not wash away Ama's dread. "Kwaku," she pleaded, "return that thing. No wealth is worth this fear." Kwaku turned away. "The price is small, and it has stopped now." But greed never stops. It only pauses to grow teeth. That evening, Kwaku dreamed again of the old woman in the forest. "The calabash eats what feeds it," she said, her voice echoing. "You have fed it well." Kwaku awoke screaming. Outside, thunder rolled through the sky. Somewhere deep in the forest, something laughed. And far away, unseen by Kwaku, his largest cocoa farm caught fire, not by flame, but by rot spreading silently from root to root. The loss had begun to show itself. The morning after Kwaku Mensah dreamed of the old woman again, he rose before the rooster crowed. Sleep had abandoned him like a friend who no longer trusted his company. His body was rested, yet his spirit felt bruised, as though it had wrestled with something unseen throughout the night. He stepped outside into the cool dawn. The village of Asafo-Kɔkɔɔ lay quiet, wrapped in pale mist. Normally, this hour brought him peace. Today, it brought unease. Kwaku decided to inspect his farms himself. As he walked the familiar paths, the land felt different beneath his feet. The soil, once firm and warm, now crumbled too easily, like ash between fingers. When he reached his largest cocoa farm, the one he often boasted about, his heart sank. Leaves drooped unnaturally, pods hung blackened, their sweetness spoiled before harvest. Some trees leaned at strange angles, their roots exposed as if they had tried to crawl away from the earth and failed. "This cannot be," Kwaku muttered. He knelt and touched the ground. It was cold. Farmhands arrived soon after, murmuring anxiously. "Master," one said, "this sickness spread overnight." Another shook his head. "I have never seen rot move this fast." Kwaku straightened, anger rising to replace fear. "Fix it," he snapped. "I pay you to fix it." But rot does not obey orders, and the earth does not respect gold. By midday, word spread across Asafo-Kɔkɔɔ. The man once praised for sudden fortune now attracted whispers of suspicion. "This wealth came too quickly," some said. "No blessing grows without patience," others murmured. The elders called for a meeting that evening beneath the old odum tree at the center of the village. Kwaku attended reluctantly, his arms heavy with gold bracelets, his pride heavier still. The eldest among them, Nanabuakie, leaned on his staff and studied Kwaku with eyes that had seen many seasons. "Kwaku Mensah," the elder said, "prosperity that arrives without roots often falls at the first wind." Kwaku laughed, forcing confidence into his voice. "Are you saying success is a crime?" "No," Nanabuakie replied calmly, "but arrogance invites spirits who collect their debts without mercy." A murmur of agreement rippled through the gathering. Ama Serwa sat quietly behind the women, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She did not look at Kwaku. She did not need to. Her silence spoke louder than accusation. That night, Kwaku returned home furious. "They envy me, that is all. When a man rises, others suddenly become wise." Ama finally spoke. "When a tree grows too fast, its trunk is hollow." Kwaku ignored her. Instead, he turned again to the calabash. It sat in the corner, darker than the shadows around it. He had begun to hate its presence even as he depended on it. He lifted the lid. "What more do you want?" he asked, his voice sharp. "Have I not fed you enough?" The calabash answered by growing warm in his hands. Kwaku hesitated. Then, as always, desire overcame caution. "Protect my wealth," he whispered. "Let nothing I own be taken from me." The calabash trembled violently. A foul-smelling mist escaped its mouth before sealing itself again. The next day, Kwaku's wealth was indeed protected, but not as he had imagined. Thieves were caught and punished harshly, some breaking limbs while fleeing his compounds. Traders who once negotiated now bowed silently, afraid to meet his eyes. Even the chief avoided him, unsettled by how fortune clung to Kwaku like a curse. But protection came with isolation. Children stopped greeting him. Women crossed the road when he passed. The drums no longer played his praise. Worse still, Amma grew distant. Their home, once filled with evening stories and shared laughter, became silent. Amma slept lightly, often waking from dreams she refused to describe. Kojo clung to her constantly, as though something stalking their household. One night, as Kwaku counted his gold, Amma spoke softly. "The spirits are not angry because you are rich. They are angry because you refuse to see others." Kwaku slammed his hand down. "I worked for this." Amma met his gaze, tears shining. "No, Kwaku, you took it." Her words struck him harder than he expected. That same night, thunder rolled again beneath a clear sky. Wind howled through the village, ripping palm leaves from roofs. People stayed indoors, whispering prayers. Kwaku awoke to screaming. He rushed outside to see fire consuming one of his storage huts. Not a normal fire, it burned cold and blue, devouring grain without smoke. Villagers watched from a distance, afraid to help. "Water!" Kwaku shouted. No one moved. By morning, the hut was gone. So were the crops inside. Kwaku fell to his knees, hands trembling. He ran back inside and grabbed the calabash. "Why are you doing this?" he cried. "You promised." The calabash was heavier than ever. When he lifted it, a drop of dark liquid spilled onto the floor and ate into the clay like acid. A voice, no longer the old woman's but deeper, hungrier, whispered within him. "You asked to keep everything, so we take everything else." Kwaku staggered back in horror. For the first time, he understood the truth the elders had always known. Greed does not give, it exchanges, and it never tells you the full price until payment is due. Outside, the forest stirred, and far within its depths, something prepared to collect what Kwaku Mensah still believed he could keep. The fire that consumed Kwaku Mensah's storage hut did more than destroy grain. It burned the final thread that bound him to the trust of Asafo-Kɔkɔɔ. By dawn, the story had traveled through the village like Harmattan fire through dry bush. Not just that Kwaku's store had burned, but how it had burned, without smoke, without warmth, and without help. People spoke in hushed tones. "This is not a man's fire. The spirits have marked him." Even water feared that flame. Kwaku walked through the village that morning, expecting sympathy. Instead, doors closed softly as he passed. Mothers pulled children closer. Old men stared at the ground. No one greeted him, not even the beggars who once waited by his gate. For the first time since his fortune rose, Kwaku felt poor. He went to the chief's compound, determined to demand support. Surely his status still carried weight. He stood at the gate, adjusting his cloth, rehearsing his words. The guard did not open the gate. "The chief is busy," the man said, though Kwaku could hear laughter inside. "I am Kwaku Mensah," he replied sharply. The guard nodded. "That is why the chief is busy." Humiliation burned hotter than any fire. Kwaku returned home in silence. Amma watched him from the doorway, her expression unreadable. "They have turned against me," Kwaku said bitterly. "No," Amma replied. "They have stepped aside." Kwaku scoffed. "You speak in riddles now." Amma shook her head. "When a man walks with a shadow that bites, wise people let him pass alone." That afternoon, Nana Bwake and 2 other elders arrived unannounced. They did not sit. They did not accept water. "Nana Kwaku Mensah," Nana Bwake said. "The village has spoken." Kwaku stiffened. "And what does it say?" "It says your presence invites danger. Until the spirits are appeased, you are not welcome at gatherings, markets, or councils. Exile without leaving. Isolation within home." Kwaku laughed bitterly. "You fear success, so you call it a curse." Nana Bwake's eyes hardened. "No, we fear greed because it never eats alone." The elders left. That night, Kwaku sat alone, gold scattered before him like fallen leaves. For the first time, it felt useless. He could not buy greetings, he could not purchase peace. Amma packed a small bag quietly. "Where are you going?" Kwaku demanded. "To my mother's house. Kojo will be safer there." Kwaku's chest tightened. "You would abandon me?" Amma turned, tears running freely. "I begged you to stop. Now I beg you to survive." She left before dawn. The house became unbearably quiet. Even a calabash seemed to pulse louder in the silence. Kwaku drank heavily that night. In his haze, he cursed the elders, the village, the spirits, and finally, himself. "Give me respect again," he slurred to the calabash. "Make them need me." The calabash shook violently. The next day, disease struck Asafo-Kɔkɔɔ's cattle. Traders could not leave. Hunters returned empty-handed. The river flooded its banks, destroying footpaths. People whispered Kwaku's name like a warning. Fear turned into anger. A crowd gathered outside his compound at dusk, not with weapons, but with rage sharpened by desperation. "You bring misfortune," someone shouted. "Leave our land," cried another. Kwaku peered through the gate, heart pounding. The calabash grew unbearably heavy inside the house. Suddenly, Kojo's voice echoed in his memory, laughing, running through the fields before sickness touched him. Kwaku's knees weakened. For the first time, regret pierced his greed. That night, Kwaku made a decision he should have made long ago. At dawn, he would return to the forest. Before the first rooster announced the morning, Kwaku Mensah rose from his mat. The night had been long, restless, and filled with dreams that pressed against his chest like heavy stones. In every one of them, the forest called his name, not with words, but with a pull that refused to be ignored. The calabash sat in the center of the room. It seemed larger now, though Kwaku knew it had not grown. Its presence filled the space, swallowing light, bending silence around it. He stared at it for a long time, as though waiting for it to speak first. "It ends today," he said hoarsely. The calabash did not respond, but when he reached for it, it felt warm, almost eager. Kwaku wrapped it in cloth and tied it tightly. As he stepped outside, the village still slept, but the air felt tense, like breath held too long. No one watched him leave, yet he felt eyes everywhere. The path to the river was familiar, but it no longer welcomed him. Birds did not sing. Insects fell silent as he passed. Even the river, usually lively at dawn, flowed thick and sluggish. Kwaku crossed it anyway. On the other side, the forest loomed. Its canopy swallowed the sky, and the smell of damp earth and old things filled his lungs. He hesitated at the edge, remembering childhood warnings, libations poured, names spoken with reverence. He had ignored all of that before. Now he whispered, "Ancestors, if you still hear me, forgive my blindness." The forest answered with movement. Branches creaked, leaves rustled though no wind blew. The path he remembered twisted into unfamiliar shapes, leading him deeper than before. Time lost meaning beneath the trees. Soon, Kwaku realized he was no longer alone. Footsteps echoed behind him, but when he turned, nothing stood there. Laughter whispered from above, below, inside his own head. "Who walks the forest carrying hunger?" a voice asked. Kwaku froze. "I do, and I wish to return what I took." The trees parted. The old woman appeared as she had in her dream, bent, silent, her eyes glowing faintly. The silk cotton tree towered behind her, its roots coiled like serpents. "You come back lighter, yet you carry something heavier." Kwaku knelt, placing the calabash before her. "It has ruined me," he said. "Take it back." The old woman laughed softly. "The calabash does not ruin, it reveals." Kwaku clenched his fists. "Then reveal how to end this." The old woman circled him slowly. "You fed it with desire. It fed on your fear. Balance must be restored." "How?" Kwaku asked desperately. She stopped before him. "By sacrifice." Kwaku swallowed hard. "I will give gold, land, everything." The old woman shook her head. "The forest has no use for gold." She leaned closer. "What you must give is what you fear losing most." Kwaku thought of Ama, Kojo, his name spoken without shame. His voice broke. "Take my wealth, spare my family." The old woman studied him for a long moment, then she tapped the calabash with her staff. "It is too late to bargain. The calabash is full." The ground trembled. The calabash cracked slightly, leaking dark liquid that soaked into the roots of the tree. "You may leave, but know this, the road of greed always demands one final toll." Kwaku staggered to his feet. "What toll?" The woman's eyes dimmed. "You will know when you reach home." The forest expelled him. He stumbled out just before sunset, collapsing at the riverbank. The calabash was lighter now, but not empty. As he crossed the river, Kwaku felt a deep dread settle in his bones. At the edge of the village, smoke rose. Not from his house, from Ama's mother's compound. Kwaku ran. Kwaku Mensah ran. His legs burned as though fire had been poured into his blood, yet he did not slow. The path blurred beneath his feet, roots striking his ankles, stones biting into his soles, but pain no longer mattered. All that mattered was the smoke rising in thick coils against the evening sky, the smoke curling from the direction of Ama's mother's compound. "Ancestors, no!" he whispered, his breath ragged. "Not them! Take everything else!" By the time he reached the compound, dusk had swallowed the sun. Villagers crowded the entrance, faces drawn tight with fear and grief. Some turned away when they saw him approach. Others stared openly, their eyes sharp with blame. Kwaku pushed through them. The courtyard lay in ruins. Ama's mother's house still stood, but its walls were blackened and cracked. Charred wood lay scattered like broken bones. The smell of smoke and something far worse, burnt cloth, burnt food, burnt memory hung heavy in the air. Ama sat on the ground, rocking back and forth. Kojo clutched tightly against her chest. They were alive. Kwaku fell to his knees in relief, fierce enough it almost broke him. He crawled towards them. "Ama," he said hoarsely, "my son." Ama looked up. Her eyes were empty. "Don't touch us," she said. Kwaku froze. "What happened?" he asked, though he already felt the answer coiling in his chest. Ama's mother stepped forward slowly, leaning heavily on her stick. Her once strong voice trembled. "The fire came suddenly, like the one at your store. No heat, no smoke first, just hunger." Kwaku's stomach twisted. "We lost 3 rooms and my harvest." Ama tightened her grip on Kojo. "They say it followed you. They say you brought it here." The words struck harder than any blow. "I tried to stop it," Kwaku said desperately. "I went to the forest. I tried to return it." Amma laughed, a short, broken sound. "You tried when it had already tasted us." Kojo stirred weakly in her arms. Kwaku reached out instinctively, but Amma turned away. That night, Kwaku was not allowed inside the compound. He slept under a tree, listening to whispers carried by the wind, some real, some imagined. He dreamed. He stood again before the silk cotton tree. The calabash lay open, spilling shadows onto the roots. "You were warned, yet you fed it again," the old woman said. "I came back. I tried to undo it. You came back too late. Greed runs faster than regret." When Kwaku awoke, dawn painted the sky red like fresh wounds. Amma stood before him, Kojo asleep on her back. "I am taking my son far from you until this thing is finished." Kwaku's chest tightened. "I will end it," he swore, "even if it costs me everything." Amma studied him for a long moment. "It already has," she said. She turned and walked away. Kwaku remained beneath the tree long after they disappeared. When he finally returned home, his compound felt hollow, gold everywhere, life nowhere. The calabash sat where he had left it. For the first time, Kwaku did not speak to it. Instead, he lifted it carefully, as one might lift a sleeping snake. He carried it to the center of the compound and dug a deep pit beneath the old neem tree. As he lowered the calabash into the earth, the ground trembled violently. A voice roared from within. "Bury me, and I will rise in you." Kwaku hesitated, sweat pouring from his face. Then he filled the pit. The earth sealed itself unnaturally fast. Silence followed. For the first time in many weeks, the air felt still. Kwaku collapsed, sobbing. But deep beneath the soil, roots twisted, and something began to grow. For 3 days after Kwaku Mensah buried the calabash beneath the neem tree, the compound remained unnaturally quiet. No wind stirred the leaves. No insects sang at dusk. Even the dogs that usually roamed the village avoided his gate, whining softly before turning away. Kwaku took this silence as mercy. He rose each morning and worked his remaining farms with his own hands. He no longer ordered others. He no longer counted gold. He worked until his palms blistered and his back ached, as though pain itself might cleanse him. But the earth remembers what men try to forget. On the 4th day, the neem tree began to change. Its leaves darkened, thickening into a deep, unnatural green. Its trunk swelled slightly, veins rising beneath the bark like muscles beneath skin. At night, Kwaku swore he could hear a low pulsing sound coming from its roots, slow, patient, hungry. He told himself it was imagination. Villagers noticed too. "That tree was never like that," they whispered. "It drinks too much water." "No," said another, "it drinks something else." Nanabawaki came again, standing at the edge of Kwaku's compound without crossing in. "You cannot hide a debt by burying it," the elder said quietly. Kwaku bowed his head. "I am trying to change." Nanabawaki nodded slowly. "Change is not proven by effort alone, but by what you are willing to lose." That night, the dreams returned. Kwaku stood in darkness, roots wrapping around his legs. The calabash hung from the branches of the neem tree, cracked wide open. "You buried the mouth," the voice said, "but you fed the seed." Kwaku woke screaming. The next morning, he discovered something worse. Gold had begun to sprout. Small yellow flakes pushed through the soil around the neem tree, glinting in the sun like dew. By midday, people gathered outside his compound again, this time not with anger, but awe. "The earth gives him gold now. He is chosen." "No," someone whispered, "he is cursed." Fear and desire fought in their voices. Kwaku rushed forward, scooping soil over the flakes with trembling hands. "Go away," he shouted. "Leave me." But greed, once awakened, is contagious. By nightfall, someone crept into his compound and dug near the tree. When the ground cracked open, a wave of cold swept through the village. A child fell ill. A goat collapsed, foaming at the mouth. The elders sealed the compound with markings and warnings. Kwaku sat alone inside, watching the neem tree pulse softly under the moon. The earth had accepted the calabash, but it had not forgiven him. And deep below, roots tightened their grip. The sealed markings at the edge of Kwaku Mensah's compound did not last long. Fear weakens walls, but greed breaks them. At dawn on the first day after the gold appeared, a young man named Yao crept past the warning symbols. He had watched Kwaku's rise with envy since the beginning, and now the earth itself whispered promises to him. "Just a little," Yao murmured as he dug near the neem tree. "Just enough to change my life." When his fingers touched the golden flakes, the ground shuddered. Yao gasped as the soil tightened around his wrists like a clenched fist. He screamed, but the sound came out thin, as though swallowed by the earth. By the time villagers reached him, Yao's hair had turned gray. He lived, but his strength never returned. The story spread quickly. Some fled Asafo-Kɔkɔɔ, others stayed away from Kwaku's compound entirely, but many, too many, felt the pull. Soon sickness followed. Fields that once grew maize yielded twisted stalks. The river tasted bitter. Children woke screaming from dreams of roots wrapping around their legs. At night, villagers heard a deep rhythmic sound beneath the ground, like a giant heart beating. The elders gathered again beneath the odum tree. "The hunger has spread," Nanabuaki said grimly. "This is no longer one man's punishment. It has become a village trial." All eyes turned toward Kwaku's compound. That evening, Nanabuaki entered the sealed ground for the first time. Kwaku knelt before him. "I tried to bury it. I tried to stop it." Nanabuaki studied the neem tree, its leaves now shimmering faintly gold in the fading light. "Greed planted this seed," the elder said, "but only sacrifice can starve it." Kwaku swallowed. "What must I give?" Nanabuaki met his eyes. "Not what you own, what you are." As night fell, the ground trembled harder than ever before. Cracks spread from the neem tree outward like veins. The calabash's voice rose, no longer whispering. "You fed me your wanting. Now I feed on all wanting." Kwaku felt the truth settle like a stone in his chest. This was never just about him. It was about the hunger he had released. And hunger, once loose, does not stop until it is answered. The night after Nanabuaki spoke of sacrifice, sleep abandoned Asafo-Kɔkɔɔ entirely. Lamps burned low in every compound. Mothers whispered prayers into the ears of their children. Even the forest stood uneasy, its usual chorus of insects reduced to a strained, broken rhythm. At the center of it all stood Kwaku Mensah's compound, where the neem tree now glowed faintly, its leaves catching moonlight like hammered gold. Beneath it, the buried calabash throbbed with life, sending slow tremors through the soil. Kwaku sat at the foot of the neem tree, unmoving. He had not eaten since morning. Hunger clawed at his stomach, but it felt small compared to the weight pressing on his chest. Nanabuaki's words echoed again and again in his mind. "Not what you own, what you are." For the first time since his fortune began, Kwaku did not reach for gold to quiet his fear. Instead, he allowed the fear to stay. Before dawn, the elders gathered once more. This time, they did not remain outside the compound. They entered, forming a wide circle around the neem tree. Each carried a staff marked with ancestral symbols. No drums played, no songs rose, only silence. Nanabuaki stepped forward. "Kwaku Mensah," he said, his voice steady. "This choice cannot be shared, it cannot be delayed, and it cannot be undone." Kwaku nodded slowly. "I understand." The earth seemed to listen. "The anger beneath this tree feeds on desire. It grows because you wanted more than your life required. To end it, you must offer the one thing it cannot digest." Kwaku lifted his eyes. "What is that?" "Your greed," the elder replied, "completely, without reservation." A murmur rippled through the circle. Kwaku felt a strange calm settle over him. He thought of Ama's laughter when they were young, of Kojo's first steps, of the simple joy of harvesting cocoa with neighbors, sharing palm wine at dusk. He had traded all of that for more. "I will do it," he said. The calabash screamed beneath the ground. Cracks split the soil, and the neem tree groaned as though in pain. Golden sap dripped from its bark, burning the earth where it fell. Nanabwaki raised his staff. "Kwaku Mensah," he intoned, "you must renounce every gift the calabash gave you, not in words alone, but in truth." Kwaku stood. He walked to his house and brought out his gold, his cowries, the fine cloth, the deeds to land. He placed them all at the foot of the tree. "I release you," he said, his voice trembling. "You do not belong to me." The ground shook violently, but the calabash did not weaken. Instead, the voice roared louder. "You lie. You still want." Kwaku fell to his knees. He realized then that letting go of possessions was easy. Letting go of the hunger inside him was not. Tears streamed down his face. "I wanted to be greater than others," he confessed. "I wanted to be feared. I wanted to be remembered." The neem tree convulsed. Nanabwaki nodded grimly. "Say it again." "I wanted more," Kwaku cried, "even when I had enough." The ground split open. The calabash rose from the earth, cracked in leaking shadows. Roots wrapped tightly around it like chains. The hunger screamed. Kwaku felt something tear loose inside him, a sharp, aching emptiness where desire once lived. He gasped, collapsing forward. The neem tree shuddered, its golden glow fading. The calabash shrank, but it did not disappear. Nanabwaki stepped back, face pale. "The sacrifice has begun, but it is not complete." Kwaku lifted his head weakly. "What more?" The elder's voice softened. "You must live without the hunger, forever." The words settled heavily over the circle. Living without greed meant living without ambition, pride, in the need to be more than others. It meant becoming ordinary. Kwaku closed his eyes. "I accept." The calabash screamed one final time. When the calabash screamed, the sound did not fade the way noise usually does. It sank deep into the ground, into the roots of the neem tree, into the bones of Asafo-Kɔkɔɔ itself. Then, suddenly, there was silence. Not the peaceful silence of dawn, or the restful hush of night. This silence was heavy. The earth stopped trembling. The wind froze mid-breath. Even the elders stood as if carved from wood, afraid that any movement might wake what had finally gone still. Kwaku Mensah lay face down on the ground beneath the neem tree. For a long moment, no one dared to approach him. Then Nanabwaki stepped forward and knelt. He placed 2 fingers gently against Kwaku's neck and exhaled slowly. "He lives," the elder said. The village released a breath it had been holding for weeks. Slowly, cautiously, life crept back into sound. A bird called from the forest. A baby cried somewhere beyond the compound. The world, it seemed, had decided to continue. The neem tree stood unchanged in shape, but its unnatural glow had vanished. The golden sap dried into dull resin and flaked away. The soil around its roots darkened to its natural brown, and where golden flakes once pushed through, only earth remained. The calabash was gone. Not broken, not buried, gone. Kwaku stirred. When he opened his eyes, they looked different. The sharp hunger that once lived behind them had vanished, replaced by something quieter, something tired but clear. He sat up slowly, his body weak as if he had been ill for many days. Nanabwaki offered him water. Kwaku drank, surprised by how satisfying the simple taste felt. "Is it finished?" Kwaku asked softly. The elder nodded. "The hunger has been silenced, but silence, too, has a cost." Kwaku understood. The elders dispersed quietly, leaving him alone beneath the neem tree as the sun rose fully over Asafo-Kɔkɔɔ. That day, the village healed, slowly. The cattle stopped dying, the river cleared. Crops, though damaged, showed signs of recovery. The air felt lighter, as though a great weight had been lifted. But Kwaku's life did not return to what it had been. He sold what little remained of his property and gave the proceeds to those who had lost the most. He kept no record of what he gave. He did not want to remember. He worked the fields again, this time alongside others, not above them. His hands hardened, his back bent. People watched him carefully at first, then cautiously, then gradually they allowed him back into their lives, not as a man of importance, but as a man of presence. Amma returned weeks later. She stood at the gate with Kojo, studying the compound. Kwaku did not rush to her, he did not plead. He bowed his head. "I am no longer a man who wants more, only one who wants to do right." Amma searched his face for a long time. Then she stepped inside. That night, as Kwaku lay beside his family, he felt something unfamiliar and precious: contentment. Yet deep within the forest, beneath layers of earth and memory, the roots of the neem tree twitched, not in hunger, but in warning. Life after greed moved slowly, like a river finding a new course after floodwaters recede. For Kwaku Mensah, each day felt strangely hollow, yet honest, as though the world had stripped him bare and left only what could not be taken. He woke before dawn, not to count possessions, but to listen, to the soft breathing of Amma beside him, to Kojo's quiet murmurs as he dreamed. These sounds, once unnoticed, now anchored him. Kwaku owned little. His clothes were plain, his meals simple, yet the absence of wanting left room for something deeper: work. He joined the farmers in the fields without announcing himself. No one gave him special tools or lighter tasks. He hoed, planted, harvested, and rested when others rested. Sweat washed away the last traces of pride that gold had painted on him. At first, villagers spoke to him only when necessary. But time, like rain, softens hardened ground. One afternoon, an old farmer collapsed in the sun. Without hesitation, Kwaku lifted him and carried him home. Another day, he shared his food with a stranger without asking their name. These small acts passed quietly, without praise, and that was enough. Yet not everyone trusted the change. Some still avoided Kwaku's eyes. Some whispered that a hunger once awakened never truly dies. Nanabwaki watched carefully. "You walk well," the elder said one evening as they sat beneath the odum tree. "But remember, humility is not proven in ease, but in temptation." As if summoned by those words, temptation returned. A trader from the south arrived one market day, his donkey loaded with cloth and salt. He recognized Kwaku at once. "You were the man who once owned half this land," the trader said. "I have heard stories." Kwaku nodded politely. The trader leaned closer. "I know ways wealth can be made again, quietly." For a moment the old hunger stirred, faint, distant, like an echo in a deep cave. Kwaku felt it and turned away. "I have what I need," he said simply. The trader laughed and moved on. That night, Kwaku dreamed again of the neem tree, but this time its roots lay still, resting. When he woke, he felt no fear. The village slowly accepted him, not as a leader, not as a cautionary tale, but as a man among men. And in that quiet belonging, Kwaku discovered what wealth had never given him: peace. Stories in Asafo-Kɔkɔɔ did not begin as entertainment. They began as warnings. They were told when the moon hung low and children gathered close to the fire, when the night was quiet enough for lessons to slip gently into listening ears. And as time passed, the elders found themselves returning to one story more than any other, not to shame, but to remember. Nana Bawaki was the first to speak Kwaku Mensah's name aloud again. He did so one evening beneath the odum tree, his voice calm, measured, carrying the weight of seasons. "There was once a man," he began, "who believed the earth had cheated him." Children leaned forward. He was not poor, yet he was never satisfied. He believed more would make him whole. The elders did not mention the calabash at first. They spoke of impatience, of comparison, of the quiet way greed sharpens itself long before it draws blood. Kwaku often passed by at a distance, pretending not to hear, but every word reached him. Some nights, Amma squeezed his hand when the story turned close to pain. Other nights, Kojo listened wide-eyed, unaware that the lessons sat beside him. And when the man found a gift that answered every desire, Nana Bawaki continued, he forgot that gifts are not always blessings. The elders spoke carefully. They did not name spirits or forests. They named choices. As the weeks passed, the story changed shape. It became less about Kwaku and more about the village, about how envy watched in silence, how fear fed the fire, how many had wished for the same gold without touching it. Kwaku understood then. The story was no longer his alone. It belonged to Asafo-Kɔkɔɔ. One evening, Nana Bawaki invited Kwaku to sit among the elders. The circle opened reluctantly, then held. "You will not speak," the elder told him, "but you will listen." Kwaku nodded. As the story ended, Nana Bawaki added a final line. The man lived, but he lived smaller, so that the world around him could live fully. No one laughed. No one argued. Children carried the words home like seeds. That night, Kwaku slept deeply. For the first time, he was not running from hunger, from regret, or from himself. The past does not always return with thunder. Sometimes it comes like a familiar knock, soft, patient, and impossible to ignore. It was during the season when the cocoa pods ripened slowly, heavy with promise, that a stranger arrived in Asafo-Kɔkɔɔ. He was not a trader, nor a traveler passing through. He walked with purpose, his sandals worn thin by long journeys, his eyes alert to everything around him. He asked for Kwaku Mensah. The name still carried weight, lighter than before, but not forgotten. Kwaku was working in the fields when the stranger found him. The man watched for a moment, perhaps surprised to see the once wealthy farmer bent in the dirt like any other. "You are Kwaku Mensah," the stranger said. Kwaku straightened and nodded. "I am." The man introduced himself as Ntem, a messenger from a village beyond the forest. His voice carried no accusation, only caution. "I have come because your story reached us, and now something else has followed it." Kwaku felt a familiar chill. "The forest has changed," the messenger continued. "Roots surface where they never did. Trees bleed sap that hardens like gold. Hunters avoid certain paths." The village murmured uneasily. Nana Bawaki stepped forward. "The hunger was silenced." "So we were told." But silence does not always mean death. Kwaku felt the weight of his past settle heavily on his shoulders. I will go. Amma turned sharply. You have done enough. I have not, Kwaku replied gently. Not if what I released still breathes. That night, Kwaku prepared to leave. He packed nothing of value, only water, dried food, and a small knife. No charms, no gold. Before dawn, Kojo hugged him tightly. Will you come back? The boy asked. Kwaku knelt. I will try. The forest greeted him without warmth, but without hostility. The path shifted beneath his feet, yet no voices whispered this time. Deep within, he found the neem tree's echo, a place where roots still twisted unnaturally, though no calabash lay there. Kwaku knelt. I am here, he said. Not to take, not to bargain, only to face what remains. The forest stirred. Somewhere beneath the soil, something listened. The forest did not answer Kwaku Mensah at once. It never had. Time in the forest moved differently, bending around intention rather than footsteps. Kwaku remained kneeling long after the sun climbed overhead, his knees aching, his throat dry. He did not call out again. He had learned that impatience was a form of hunger, too. When the forest finally responded, it was not with a voice. The ground shifted. Roots emerged slowly from the soil, pale and thick, weaving together until they formed a wide circle around him. Trees leaned inward, their branches knitting overhead to block the sky. The air grew cool and heavy with the scent of damp earth. Kwaku remained still. From the shadows stepped the old woman. She looked smaller than before, less terrifying. Her back was still bent, but her eyes no longer burned. Instead, they reflected, like water. You return without wanting, she said. I return with responsibility, Kwaku replied. She nodded once. The hunger you fed has been quieted, but echoes linger. She gestured, and the forest opened a vision before him. Kwaku saw himself as he once was, counting gold, ignoring Amma's voice, stepping over others without seeing them. The image was painful, sharp. Then the vision changed. He saw villagers digging near the neem tree, their faces tight with desperation. He saw how easily his old hunger had awakened theirs. Greed teaches greed. This is its final poison. Kwaku bowed his head. What must I do? The old woman reached into the roots and pulled forth a small calabash, plain, unmarked, empty. This one is not the one you buried. This one does nothing. Kwaku frowned. It holds nothing, she continued, and because of that, it is powerful. She placed it in his hands. Take it back to your village. Place it where all can see. Let it remain empty. Kwaku understood. The test was not sacrifice, it was restraint. The forest receded. The circle opened. The old woman vanished like mist touched by sun. Kwaku returned to Asafo-Kɔkɔɔ by nightfall. At dawn, he placed the empty calabash under the odum tree in the village center. This is what remains when wanting ends. No gold appeared, no spirits stirred. And that was the lesson.
Years passed in Asafo-Kɔkɔɔ the way they always had, quietly, steadily, marked by harvests and harmattan winds, births and burials. Yet something in the village had changed, subtle but enduring, like a scar that reminds rather than wounds. Beneath the odum tree at the center of the village sat the empty calabash. Children grew up seeing it there. They played around it, sometimes asking what it was for. And when they asked, the elders smiled and said, "It is for remembering." No one touched it. Kwaku Mensah aged gently. His hair grayed, his steps slowed, but his heart remained light. He never again sought leadership or wealth beyond what his hands could earn. He farmed, repaired tools, and taught young men how to read the land without trying to own it. Amma stayed by his side. Their home was modest, but laughter returned to it, soft at first, then full. Kojo grew strong and curious, learning not only how to work the earth, but how to listen to it. Sometimes strangers passed through Asafo-Kɔkɔɔ and asked about the Calabash. Traders especially, those who measured life in profit and gain. "Why keep an empty thing?" they would ask. Nanabuwake, now very old, always answered the same way. Because fullness without wisdom destroys, and emptiness with wisdom saves. One season, drought threatened the land. Crops struggled. Fear crept back into hearts. Yet this time, no one whispered of shortcuts or forbidden forests. They shared water. They shared food. They endured together. And they survived. When Nanabuwake finally joined the ancestors, the village gathered beneath the odum tree. Kwaku stood quietly at the edge of the crowd. He did not speak, but his presence told its own story. As the sun set, Kojo placed a bowl of food beside the empty calabash, not as an offering, but as a symbol. "Enough," he said simply. That night, the forest rested. And from that day on, whenever greed stirred in Asafo-Kɔkɔɔ, someone would glance at the empty calabash and remember, greed leads to loss, but contentment leads to life. And that is why to this day, the people of Asafo-Kɔkɔɔ teach their children not how to get more, but how to know when they have enough. The end.